Northeastern Region RAC. We'd like to welcome everybody out to the Northeastern Region RAC. We'll get started. An opening statement here. Welcome to the RAC, Northeastern Region Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the Vernal DWR office, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions, ideas on wildlife management in our state. This RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with the setting of wildlife policy of our state. Wildlife management is a complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It's why we're here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. We expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior includes booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking. You can also help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors or of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC chair will remind the attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, the applicable individual or individuals will be asked to leave. Lastly, please help reduce distractions during the meeting by putting your phone on silent. And if you need to take a call, we ask that you step outside. We'll move on to introducing some of the RAC. We also want to recognize Randy Dirth with the Wildlife Board in the room here. It looks like we have Kent Johnson, Gary Nelson, and Paula Richmond, both from the Wildlife Board on line as well. So welcome them to the meeting. We'll just start at the end down there and work our way across in doing our introductions. So
Brad Horricks.
Dusty Carpenter with the BLM.
Richard Bueller, Public at Large.
Natasha Haddon, U.S. Forest Service.
Grizz O'Lean, RAC Chair, Sportsman.
Nathan Crapo, Public at Large.
Mark China with non-consumptive user.
Eric Major, Public at Large.
And we have, there's two of RAC members that were going to join online. They haven't seen them on there yet, but Jake Huber, he might be showing up here in a minute. And I don't know where Richie Anderson was, but I thought he was going to be online. Anyhow, we will move on to the approval of the agenda and the minutes.
I make a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting
Okay, and the agenda there too as well.
and the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes. Natasha, do you have a second?
Second it.
Eric will second it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? I don't believe so. Okay, we will move on to the Wildlife Board meeting, some update. On January 4th, the Wildlife Board meeting had a meeting there at Farmington. On the agenda, they had the following. The approval of agenda action item. Following motion was made by Kent Johnson, seconded by Brett Selman. It passed unanimously. That was approved the agenda. Let's see here. The Utah Black Bear Management Revision action, there was a following motion made by Kent to accept it, and it was seconded by Gary Nelson. It passed unanimously, and the motion was move that we ask the division to work with federal land agencies to address concerns that they have with the use of barrels on the landscape. This is to be placed on the action log and addressed during the January 2025 board meeting. That was be able to use barrels for, use it for bait, for black bear baiting. The next motion was move that we accept the black bear management pass, and that passed. The next one was a motion to approve the elk management unit plans as presented by the division. The next motion was to move to approve the rule amendments as presented with the request the division to add a number of poaching reported reward permits issued statewide to the annual report, not approved unanimously. The next motion was on ornamental species. The motion was to move to accept the division's recommendation as presented, and that passed unanimously. And then the next one was they moved to accept the division's recommendations to move the June 24th Wildlife Board meeting to the 13th and the December 1 to the 12th, and that passed unanimously as well. We will move on to the regional update from Miles.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Miles Hamburg. I'm the regional supervisor for the Division of Wildlife here in the region. Just a minute, we'll load up a PowerPoint.
Miles, if you could confirm your microphone is not muted. We've lost audio from Vernal. A community fishing pond that we partnered with Roosevelt City and a number of other partners. And so we'll be managing that as a community fishery. Yeah, yeah, go back. Okay, if you can go back one still. Yeah, just a kind of a report on a different event we held this year. We had a porcupine viewing event at Ouray National Wildlife Refuge. We had like over 100 people come from all over the state. I think there was just a small handful of local people that came to that event, and so it was pretty popular for folks. Ouray is one of the unique places that I've ever found that you can actually go out and see porcupines in any given day, and oftentimes there's multiple porcupines out there, and so a lot of people had never seen a porcupine before, so they really enjoyed the opportunity to see that. So it's something a little different this year, and that went off pretty well. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Jose Hernandez, he's our new sport fish biologist, kind of covering our regional reservoirs. He's been with us for a few years. He's previously been working on our natives aquatics program. He's replacing Natalie Boren, who was promoted to our aquatics manager. So we're excited to have Jose working on our fisheries, and he's already off hitting the ground running on that. So our old Fort Ponds, that's our community fishery here in Vernal. That's now open. It's been open for the year, and we've got a number of people already taking advantage of that. So that's a good opportunity for people locally to get out and do some fishing. Our walleye and tiger muskie stocking is going on this week. We'll be stocking sterile walleye into Red Fleet Reservoir. Then we've got a few different reservoirs such as Cottonwood Reservoir and Bullock that will receive tiger muskie as well. Our native aquatics crews are out busy doing pike minnow estimates on the Green River. That's electrofishing. So they do 3 passes, and they're just finishing their first pass this week, and they'll be doing that for another couple of weeks at least. So we are happy to report that Calder's Reservoir has certainly survived the winter. People are catching fish there, so that's good. The ice has just come off of Calder and Matt Warner as well. Access to Matt Warner has just opened up in the last day or two. We'll be putting some nets out next week to evaluate survival on those 2 reservoirs. According to our oxygen profiles, we feel like Matt Warner will come through the winter just fine. We'll see what Krause Reservoir has. We may have a partial winter kill. It did have a lower oxygen level this winter. So it's tournament season down at Pelican Lake. We've had a number of tournaments going on down there by different groups, but it's been good bass fishing. I think there's been some bass caught this year in the 7-pound range. So that's a good opportunity for some big bass. And then we're also starting into some Strawberry River restoration design with some of the contractors who'll be working on that. So we'll be doing some work in the river and putting some new structures and different things to rehab that after the floods from the Dollar Ridge fire. Habitat sections out on the ground, doing some maintenance on guzzlers here in our lower elevation areas. And so that's good to get out and get some of that maintenance done before the summer really kicks off, make sure we're capturing water. Just recently, we had the conservation permit funding meeting that was held Salt Lake statewide. And this year, there's over $4.8 million that was contributed to habitat projects and other research projects in the state. So these are all dollars, from some of the allocated by the sportsman's groups from conservation permits and other funding sources. So that's pretty exciting. It's, I think, exceeded last year by $1 million. So it's a big commitment to improving wildlife in the state. We just have some other projects that we'll need to try to finish up, some other restoration type projects, just waiting for things to continue to open up in the higher elevations to do that. And then we're getting busy with starting irrigation and things on some of our lower elevation properties. Wildlife section, sage-grouse lek surveys are underway. Numbers appear to be up so far this year, so that's good. Sage-grouse seem to have a bit of a cycle, and we're on the upswing of that cycle right now, so that's great. We're also monitoring the movements of the 30 pronghorn and 30 mule deer that were captured late last winter on the Anthro area for a migration study, and then we'll still have to catch 30 elk later this year, but we're excited to see what happens with some of those movements on the Anthro unit. Our conservation biologist, Brian Maxfield, has been banding black rosy finches. This is a species of greatest conservation need. He banded 25 new birds this year, but he had 15 recaptures from previous years, and then actually 2 birds that were banded back in 2011. So this is kind of new work. We don't have a lot of information on how rosy finches migrate and what, between different ranges and different things. So it's interesting information. Some black rosy finches could be summering here in the Uintas, but they also could be migrating from the north.
But he also banded about 300 gray crowned rosy finches, and those are definitely long distance migrants from North America into Canada and maybe even Alaska. So evening grosbeak banding, that's another species that we're trying to learn some more information on. I've been doing that as well. And then the last thing for the wildlife sections, our deer survival looks good this winter in the region. The deer have come out pretty well. We had good survival rates, so it's like a good opportunity for us to be able to grow some deer this year. Law enforcement has been investigating a bald eagle that was shot near Pelican Lake. So it's unfortunate to have that happen, but they've been investigating that and see what can be done. We held a horseback training in the region for all the new officers around the state. So our region is one of the main regions that use horses a lot still. And so we host training quite often for some of the new officers. And then we've also been doing a number of patrols, patrolling shed closure areas, seasonal closure areas and shed hunting violations. And so there's been some violations or citations issued in that effort as well. We'll also be doing some saturation patrols up at Flaming Gorge, just targeting people that may be out snagging and different things or over limits during the spawning season. So a lot of work going forward this summer. It looks like we'll have another busy year. And if you ever have a turkey tag out in front of the office, is a pretty good place to hunt. So we're out here in the back parking lot. So yeah, just a tip. That's it for me.
Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I forget to hit the mic there. All right, we'll start with agenda number 5, deer permit recommendations. Okay, Jake's online now. Go ahead, Dax. Everybody should have already seen the presentation. So I guess give us a summary of what you like and we'll go to questions.
Sounds good. I do have one correction. We had a miscalculation in the recommendations. The limited entry late muzzleloader hunt that we have on, it's like the first week of November on the general season units. In the plan, we have that set at a minimum of 5 per unit and up to 1/2 of 1%. And we had an oversight, we had a miscalculation. So for the Monroe unit, we recommended 6. It says 6 in the packet, but it should be 5. Our recommendation is 5. That would be that minimum. And then for the Fish Lake unit, in the packet, it says 8. It should be 6. So I just wanted to correct that. We're trying to stay with what's in the plan. We just had an oversight there. So, but otherwise, yeah, hopefully you're able to watch the presentation, just making recommendations to try to manage towards the objectives in our management plans, and happy to answer any questions or do whatever I can to help facilitate a good discussion tonight. Happy to be here.
All right, we'll open up the questions from the RAC. I don't know, that's probably 8 seconds. Is there anybody online? Jake, do you have a question or anything? Any clarification or anything?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, if none of the RAC members have any questions.
I know there was some of the racks I know that you had the additional info about the southern units. How did that go in those? Did the southern RAC like the additional permit numbers, or did they? I don't know.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. We took a little bit of a different approach when we looked at the general season deer recommendations for southern region. And I think there was a mixed reception to that. Some folks thought it was okay, some didn't. I guess just to clarify, our intent there was sometimes folks say, hey, the division doesn't listen to us, you don't listen to us. And we said, hey, we are listening, we hear you. There seems to be a lot of reluctance in southern Utah to increase permit numbers. They're coming off a period of some pretty bad drought years, consecutive bad drought years, and populations declined. We made some really aggressive cuts in that region. And the last couple of years and the year that we're currently sitting in, things are looking better, things are looking up. And so we've made recommendations to increase permits, and that's been met with a lot of resistance and a lot of pushback from folks in the southern region, more so than in any other region, by far. And so this year, last year, the recommendations for increases, none of those passed the board except a small increase on the Pine Valley unit, and none of the other increases were accepted last year. So this year we said, here's where it could be. When we crunch the numbers, here's where it could be. This is kind of, I think we labeled that column calculator max or something like that.
That's the yellow column.
That yellow column. Yeah.
That you got hammered on.
And we said, here's where we could go to this number, and we will still very likely come in within plan objective. And because we've heard so much feedback from you guys in the South, meet us halfway, essentially. You said progress, some progress is better than nothing. Progress, not perfection. To have no increases again would put our biologists in a really tough spot. The longer you run with really high buck-to-doe ratios, it seems like the harder it is socially and even just logistically to get those buck-to-doe ratios back down. So that's why we included that extra column for the southern region, just trying to be totally transparent about what it is and why we did it. Some folks thought it was okay. Some folks didn't like it. The northern region RAC voted, they wanted us to go even a little more rather than meeting them halfway. They said go 3/4. Central region said go all the way to the calculator max. Southern region said let's do the halfway, the division recommendation. And last night in Southeastern region, they said go to the max. So that's kind of how the discussions have gone. And what we were trying to do there was just to be really transparent and tell hunters from Southern Utah, hey, we hear you, we're listening to you. Let's at least make some progress, even if we can't get all the way there in 1 year.
I watched all the RAC meetings, so a lot of the questions that I had were kind of answered in some of there. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if it's fair for the people here that maybe didn't hear it, but I'm not that I'm gonna go through all the questions, but there's been a lot of good questions that have come up in the other RACs, and that, especially with the way you come up with your numbers, your permit numbers and whatnot. Could you explain how you come up with the recommendations with the recruitment coming in, that type of deal? It was pretty good explanation, I thought, that you've given.
Yeah, you bet. And to be clear, this is really just focused on general season deer, not the limited entry. This is general season. And it's an exciting time. We have probably, some of the best data, the most data we've ever had on deer. We've got collar studies going on all across the state, looking at survival of adults and fawns. In the past, our permit recommendations for general season buck deer were based a lot more on just looking at the buck-to-doe ratios, 3-year averages, and kind of like an adaptive process, see where you're at, make a recommendation, go up or down. If you're above objective, increase permits. If you're below, decrease permits. It was more reactive. Because we have such good data and we've had it for several years now, we've been looking a lot more at where we are right now and where we anticipate that we'll be next year, rather than focusing as much on where we were 2 or 3 years ago. And so we basically built a model, a calculator that helps us project where we think we'll be next year under different scenarios. And that takes into account, the current buck-to-doe ratio, the current population estimate, the fawn-to-doe ratio on the unit, and then we look at the winter conditions, what kind of a winter we're having, the body conditions of the animals when we catch animals in December. We're looking at body fat, body condition scores, weights on fawns. And then we look at when the biologists are making the recommendations, this is usually early March. They're looking at, what are our survival rates right now with our collars? How does that track compared to previous years based on this year's conditions of both the deer and the weather? And so then we're anticipating what survival will be. And then we can plug in different scenarios of number of general season permits and see, based on harvest success rates from the past, where would this put our buck-to-doe ratio postseason next year? So there's still a lot of interpretation and knowledge and experience from the biologists, the district biologists, and the managers in the regions when they make those recommendations. But it's a more quantitative process than it's ever been before, and it's more proactive, trying to look ahead rather than seeing what happened and being reactive to that. And we've been doing that for, I think, 3 or 4 years now, and it's working pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's working pretty well. And we've been, at objective, or maybe more often than not, when we miss objective, we're a little above. Perhaps we're a little conservative with that calculator tool. So it's working pretty well and helps inform our recommendations. And that's where that column comes from, that calculator max is, plugging the numbers in and running different scenarios.
Jake, you had a question?
Yeah, Dax. I've seen a lot of talk, especially in those southern units, people saying that your population numbers are off. Like there's not as many deer as what you guys say there are. Can you speak to that? How you guys get that number? I've just seen a lot of people that disagree, that they say they spend a lot of time in those units. Personally, I've not been down to the southern part of the state a whole lot, so I don't know. But just wonder if you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, and that is a question we hear a lot. And it's an interesting one. So population models, how we build those models, how we come up with our population estimate. Deer are a species where it's really hard to do what we do with elk, where we fly our elk units every 3 years when they're concentrated on the winter range. We get a pretty good count of elk. We're actually doing an attempted census, trying to count all the elk on a unit. We factor in siteability because we know we miss some. But with elk, we can check our models every few years when we do those flights. We model in the in-between years. With deer, we're just modeling because it's really hard to try to count all the deer on the unit just behaviorally and how they're distributed. It's really tricky to do that. So our models incorporate, survival, production. We look at different ratios. We look at harvest information. And I've shared this example a couple times, just kind of a basic idea of the model to help just kind of wrap your mind around how it's done. This is probably an oversimplification, but say you've got your wallet and you just spent $30, you made $10, and you look in your wallet and you have $80. And you're trying to figure out how much money did I begin with? That how much money you begin with, if you're just like, okay, I spent 30, I made 10, I have 80, do the math, I must have had $100 to begin with. So, the $30 you spend, that's mortality. It's animals that die, it's hunter harvest. So it's natural mortality and hunter harvest. We have data for that based on collars. The $10 you made, that's your fawns that you're recruiting to the population. That's looking at your fawn to doe ratios and then looking at fawn survival rates. So when you do the math there, you can say, okay, if we had this ratio and we took this many animals out through natural mortality and hunter harvest, we brought this many animals in through recruitment, the survival. These are the ratios we're at now. You can run the numbers and figure out, okay, we had to have had this many animals to end up here. So that's kind of a real simple version of how the models work. And that's, I had several people ask me about it and said, well, Colorado this and Colorado, we actually use the same model that Colorado uses. It's developed by a guy, Dr. Gary White. We probably have more, a model's only as good as the data you put in it. And we probably have more real collar data that we put in our models rather than using, West-wide averages for adult doe survival. When I first started my career, those were the numbers we used. It was more numbers from the literature, looking at survival studies that had been done in years past and in other states. And now in Utah, we have a ton of that data, unit specific. And so we use those numbers for our survival estimates. We have pretty good harvest data. We're moving to mandatory reporting. So I hope we'll have, maybe even better harvest data. And that's how we build the models. And if the models are wrong, that shows up. If we run the models and our buck to doe ratios aren't matching up from what we think they would be, and it alerts us. It tells us, hey, something's not adding up here. So I understand that, folks. A lot of times the the scale, the perspective, what you see on the landscape is really different versus what you might see in the model. But I've talked to a lot of folks who, spend a bunch of time on a unit where we have collared deer, and they'll go out in the winter and look and look and look. And they're like, yeah, I saw 4 different collared deer, and I saw, 800 deer on this unit. And you guys say your population estimate's 5,000. That's crazy. And I say, well, we actually have 50 collared deer on that unit, and you only saw 4. So you do the math. So, I understand. I've done it as a hunter, especially with elk hunting right here on the South Slope, where I hunted the whole rifle hunt, and I didn't see 1 elk. I didn't even see a cow. And then 2.5 months later, I was in a helicopter and I counted 1,000 elk on the same face right where I was hunting. And I know they were there during the hunt. I just didn't see them. So I don't know. That's a long rambling answer, Jake, but I hope that maybe kind of helps the models and helps explain some of how we do it and what we do.
Yep, I appreciate that. I know seems like we're just in a new phase of what you guys' collar studies and that, and I'm actually really excited for how you guys are going to start managing, how the management's going to be changing with what's coming with seeing I watched your board meeting, your work session with the board, and I was actually quite impressed with the information you guys are gathering. And I really recommend everyone to go watch that meeting because there was a lot of useful information in it with how things are going now.
Any other questions from the RAC?
Any comments on the deer herds, specifically in Vernal, Yellowstone, Book Cliffs, Diamond Mountain?
Yeah, and we can bring folks up from the region if you'd like. I think out here, things, we had a rough winter, the winter of 22, 23. I think it was probably especially hard, more so on like the Vernal and Diamond area. Yellowstone probably seemed like the Wasatch East did a lot better, and the Book Cliffs has actually done quite well the last few years. Imagine that. Book Cliffs does good when it has water. So this last year, I think we're maybe still recovering a little bit. Our fawn survival's not as high as the conditions are great this year, but I think maybe there was some carryover effect of animals that just were still beat up from last winter. I don't know, Dallin, folks from the region, do you want to add anything to that? Or these folks probably have a better detailed understanding.
Randall Packer from the regional wildlife biologist. Just give you the specific numbers. Click it up. That way it's supposed to be on. Randall Thacker from the Northeast region here. Just giving some numbers just real quick. Last year on that hard winter we had with all the deep snow that lasted so long for us, we did lose a fair number of our fawns. We only had 19% of the fawns survive that we had in December that made it through that winter. So we also had 73% of our adult does make it. This is across the South Slope, all the way across the South Slope. And the mortality on the fawns seems to be very consistent all the way across the South Slope, but we definitely lost quite a few of them. This year, for contrast, we're at 92% right now of survival on adult does compared to, we ended at 73 last year. We're at 92% right now. We could still lose a couple more, of course. The year's not over. The year actually runs until the end of November. So we've still got several more months at least. We're really just halfway, but this is usually is when we're seeing them, big losses if we're going to see them. Our fawns, we have still lost some fawns this year. Right now we're at 65% survival on our fawns from the ones that were captured and collared last December. We were hoping that would be even a little better than that actually with the nice winter we've had. But I think we had a lot of does that went through that hard winter. Our body weights on the fawns last fall weren't great. They were just kind of average, and that's what we're seeing with this average survival rate on fawns. And so, yeah, it definitely looks for the does. It looks a lot better than in the past last year. This year, the fawns look like we're going to be probably very average on survival rates probably for fawns, but nothing like the 19% which is all we had last year. So it is looking definitely better than last year, and the body weights and everything else look to be improving even last fall. So.
Yeah, I just have one question. Speaking on the Yellowstone unit a little bit, I know as I've listened to the other RAC meetings, you've talked about kind of your model and how it works in some of those units that may have higher private property or different things, and how maybe it doesn't work so well with those. And with that South Slope Yellowstone unit, having a lot of private, some tribal lands involved in that. I know we've recently adjusted the elk management, the population objective there. Do you feel like that unit is tainted, like the model, because of those other lands that are involved in that, the private and the tribal?
You know, I think with elk, it really complicates management. With deer, probably not quite as much. There definitely are some deer that spend all year on tribal ground, and definitely deer that migrate down, but usually more of that migration happens a little later after our hunts have occurred. So I think it affects Yellowstone a little bit, but not as much as some of those units in northern Utah where, you know, the 75% of the unit is private and those deer are on private during the hunting season. Is that fair, Randall? Do you feel like that's fair? Okay.
Maybe just a quick question. I don't understand all the thermal imagery stuff, but I'm sure there's some pretty awesome stuff out there. Is there anyone using that to count deer? Like, I don't know. That's a tool. Obviously, we don't want to hunt with it, but could you count deer with that?
So there are some companies that are doing that. It's been done, and we've done it in Utah looking for sage grouse leks and trying to find sage grouse. There are some companies using it for big game counts, and I think that technology is coming around. I've had a couple meetings this year with some different private companies that have that equipment. I think there's still some things to work through to deal with some of our terrain and topography and vegetation types that we have in Utah. It seems to maybe work a little better for flatter country, less thick country. But I think I would not be surprised if we end up transitioning to doing some of our survey flights with thermal imaging, probably within my career. I think we'll probably start making some of those transitions. The technology is really evolving rapidly, and they're using AI to analyze the footage that are taken by essentially big drones that go out and fly with thermal. There's some pretty interesting stuff. I think we're on the cusp of it, but we're not quite there yet.
All right, we'll go ahead and move to questions from the public. Okay, doesn't look like we have any. We'll move on to the electronic comment, what the electronic comments were.
All right. We didn't have a lot of feedback overall on this agenda item. 29% of the respondents strongly agreed with the recommendation, 14% somewhat agreed, and then 57% strongly disagreed. I think we had less than 10 comments on this. I didn't write down the specific number, but essentially the specific comments that were made were by those that disagreed, and they just felt like after a hard winter we had previously that we probably should leave the permit numbers the same. So that's really kind of the bulk of the comments on this item.
All right, we'll move on to, we don't have any public comment cards for this one. Oh, we got one there. Didn't see it.
Sorry, I was late.
Go ahead and, Tanner Carlson, go ahead and.
Yeah, Tanner Carlson, representing SFW. We had a pretty lengthy discussion on deer numbers and permit numbers throughout the state. In the end, our fulfillment committee decided to support the division's recommendations as presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? We'll give you one more chance to fill out a card. Okay. we'll move on. Okay, move on to the RAC comments and discussion. I'll start off. I think I liked what Jake mentioned on that wildlife board. When we'd had that big presentation, got to see some really good presentations on the studies they've been doing with the fat content on the deer by taking ultrasounds, the different things there. There's a lot of really good information in there that is really great to see, and see that $4.6 million that we just got that we can put to that stuff so that we can learn more and more for the deer in the state. I think that's a great thing. There's a lot of good information coming out. We do have a mule deer committee. I do sit on that committee. We are looking at a lot of different things. I can kind of give an update on that committee. Right now, we've just kind of looked at a lot of the same presentations. We're starting to start making some recommendations. We probably have another, I think, 5 or 6 meetings. That's where we're going to start getting to the meat of it. There's a lot of really good information. It's not necessarily even some of that data. I know one of the big things that came up was a lot of people are really kind of apprehensive on if you have lower buck to doe ratios, your population will increase. There's a lot of people that are having a really hard time wrapping their heads around that one. And it's not science. It's even Brock McMillan says, hey, this isn't the end all thing. This is really something interesting we just found. We don't really know, we got to still do some testing out on it. And so information like that, I think, is really going to help drive our herd. I think the other thing too is when you look at that presentation, look at the fat content that the different deer populations have. Thought it was really interesting where the Booklift deer, their highest fat content was I think the highest they ever had was like a 6.33, and the cash was a 12, like double, and it kind of made me scratch my head. But if you think about it, they're being a desert deer, they wouldn't survive as well without that much fat on them. So it's kind of one of those things where I don't think sharing that information is really great with the public. And I think the public need to see that and understand that this is where your decisions are coming from. Another one too that I thought was really, really interesting was that they said that some of the mule deer in the Book Cliffs are still nursing their fawns clear late into the year, I think it was in October into that, which found that real interesting, where they found that some of them are even stronger and bigger fawns. And so anyhow, I'm just kind of really impressed with some of that information. So.
Another thought I've been having just reading the public comments is there's still kind of this notion that more bucks means more deer, and I don't know if it needs to be a public outreach or something with these studies to point out that, it's more does that will have more fawns, not necessarily more bucks. So it just seems like often the comments are such that they're a little off.
I also listened to some of those meetings, and I don't know if it's new, but I noticed that this isn't I guess it's a little applicable, but now on YouTube, you can speed up the speed. So instead of taking 6 hours, you can do it in 3 hours if you're used to that. So good, just a pointer.
Can we make a motion?
Sounds like we don't have any more comments, so I guess we'll move to make a motion. Do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the deer permit recommendations as presented by the Division of Wildlife.
We have a motion to accept the recommendation as presented by the Division of Wildlife. Do we have a second? That was seconded by, was it Richie? Oh, Brad, sorry. Okay, we'll just do all in favor, raise your hand. Okay. Jake, okay, any opposed? I think that passed unanimously. Okay, that passed unanimously. So we will move on to, I forget, I can't vote on it. We will move on to the once in a lifetime permit recommendations from Rusty Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I try to keep my presentation significantly shorter than Dax's so that people can watch them on normal speed. So hopefully you're able to follow. So this is a summary of the 2024 recommendations for all the once in a lifetime species. And we recommend these permits based on the statewide management plans for each respective species. Just to point out some of the more notable changes this year. We're hunting the Mineral Mountains for the first time this year. We're excited about that for desert bighorn down there and that new population. Like to point out, we are recommending some pretty deep cuts on the high Uintas mountain goat units, all those units across the board. And that's due to some significant population losses after last winter, primarily. We're also recommending some pretty big decreases on bison, both in the Book Cliffs and on the Henrys. The Book Cliffs, most of those cuts are in the roadless portion of the Book Cliffs, and we've been pretty aggressive in hunting the roadless area, and it seems like maybe the bison are catching on a little bit, and we've had some issues with maybe overpressuring some of those to where they left the unit and made things pretty difficult. So that's the primary reason on the Book Cliffs. And then on the Henrys, that's one where we've been running the population pretty low with regards to our population objective. The objective is 325 adults on that unit. And with recent drought, we've been running it as low as 270. Last year, we shot for 290. And then this year is an attempt to bring the population up to 310 now that we have some grass on the ground with some precipitation down there. So this is an effort to get closer to the objective. And so it's kind of addition by subtraction. We've got to cut some permits to bring that population back up. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from RAC members?
Yeah, I've got one. Those buffalo on the bison or bison on the Book Cliffs. I noticed they're starting to get pretty close to the Colorado border. Do you guys have a plan in place to keep them from going into Colorado? Or do you have, I was wondering what you guys was working on, anything with that?
That's a great question. Clint, do you have a response to that? Just as a side note, I know in Colorado, I believe bison just got added to their protected species list. And so they may be moving to a point where they're hunting them as well as a big game species. And I don't want to speak for Colorado, but that's word on the street, I guess.
Jared, my name's Clint Sampson, biologist in the Book Cliffs. What's worked great in the past is that Colorado has not valued them as a wildlife species. And so you can see our collar data the last probably 7 years. And man, they'll go within about 3 miles and stop because the cows are pretty smart when it comes to hunting pressure. And so anytime that they are shot at, especially the cows, they're going to avoid those areas. And so you can see pretty blatant the line in the sand. It's one of the few boundaries that bison will respect is when you start shooting them. And so that's worked really well in the past. Now that Colorado's moved to value them as wildlife species, we'll see, how that changes in the future. Who knows? Maybe in the future we'll gain bison from Colorado and benefit that way. But as for right now, they're pretty intelligent when it comes to pressure, and we haven't had issues. I think the last one killed in Colorado was like I say, probably maybe 7 to 10 years ago that I know of.
What's our herd objective out there for the buck
We're
list?
shooting for 450 wintering adults,
And where are we at now?
right around 480.
And just to clarify, I hope I didn't misspeak on the Colorado. I know they've had discussions about it. I don't know if it's official yet, but it sounds like things are moving that direction. So I just don't want to misrepresent them.
Yeah, that's good information. I had not heard that, so you might want to push that out a little or somehow. I don't know. Everything I've heard is you could just shoot them if they cross over. So that's why I asked this question.
And that may still be the case for now, but yeah, it sounds like things are moving that direction where they're going to be protected.
I thought you were going to say the wolves would chase them back over. But
They might respect that line as well.
maybe. I'm just curious, and I've heard a little bit, but the history behind the roadless access, I know you brought that up. Could you talk to that? Like what's been the past agreement for that southern access in the roadless area?
Yeah, the past agreement, and the region can hopefully correct me if I say anything wrong, but the past agreement was that hunters were allowed to access that Seago trailhead and cross tribal trust land to participate in hunts in there and things like that. That agreement was terminated by the tribe. We've had some discussions to try to reopen that agreement or rewrite a different agreement. It sounds like those discussions are happening. I don't know if anything will be in place this fall for the hunts, but things are progressing and we're optimistic that hopefully at some point we can reestablish that agreement. And if not, we're also considering alternate access. And I know there's going to be a meeting, I think, next week in the Southeastern region to discuss some of those issues.
On the mountain goat in the UNAs what was the percent loss out there?
And Randall can correct me, but I think the collar data showed 26% reduction in the population. I believe our flight was down about 20%, 18 to 20, something like that, of adults. So,
Then I guess with
including kids, sorry, probably a little bit more than that, I'm guessing.
with the mountain goat, I know in the past they've talked a little bit about, hunters can kill nannies or billies. Any more thoughts about changing that to help that population? I know it's a tough one.
That's a tough one where there's not a lot of sexual dimorphism. You don't want to make a criminal out of somebody thinks they're doing the right thing. All we can do is try to educate, have people take the orientation course, how to identify a billy versus a nanny. And sometimes those, a nanny gets harvested. And so we try to compensate for that in our permit numbers.
What is that percentage of nannies they get? Do we know?
Randall Thacker again from Northeast Region. On here on the UNAs, across all the units on the UNAs, we're averaging about 30% of our harvest being nannies. And we've had, a good years when we only get like 24%. The year previous to this, 2022, it was 42%. And so there have been certain years that it gets high. And that's part of why we're being fairly conservative on a recommendation this year, trying to reduce that we've cut tags. We've recommended to cut tags because we want to make sure we reduce that potential for more people to harvest more nannies. We need, on goats, they have to be 4 or 5 years old before they're even going to produce young. They aren't like deer that breed at 2 years, the 2-year-olds will be producing. And so goats take a few more years that way. That's when it looks like when we have more tags, and on the units that have more tags, those are units that we seem to have more nanny harvest. I think it's people that maybe, or even either feel it's more competitive to harvest a good billy. That way they just have more people out there, so they're more pressured to hurry and shoot something. Or it's just you have folks who aren't willing to work as hard maybe and go after them. And so we've recommended a cut this year with hopes of reducing the number of nannies. I mean, ideally we want to see 0 nannies harvested. But Rusty's correct. It's really hard out there, especially in the winters where you're looking at them from such a distance. You know, most of the time our hunters are spotting them from 3/4 of a mile to a mile away, and then spending several hours to get close. And they get there and they talk themselves in that it's maybe a young billy, and then they take it. And that's, I get to hear from most of these hunters, and that's usually kind of their experiences. They go up there and I thought it was a young billy, you know, kind of a thing. And it is hard to take that away. I'd feel really bad forcing somebody who thought they were being honest and obeying the law, and then they, you know, accidentally break it. I'd hate to make them a criminal. But I wish there was a better way to change it. We've tried to require everybody to take the ID course that we've created and have online for anybody who gets a mountain goat tag. Natasha can speak to that. She's been through this. But yeah, we try to educate our hunters as good as we can, and would like to see it get even better. We're trying to work on to improve that course, even if we can, to try to see what we can do to reduce that percentage of females in the harvest. Does that answer your question, Richard?
Yeah, that answers it. I guess we do it with the buffalo a little bit too. So
and they're even easier to tell. They really are. They're similar, but they're way easier to tell. I'd love to take. I'd be happy to take you out today if you want to go look. It's harder than you think sometimes on the angle, depending on the angle of what you got in if it's not a real mature billy, it's really difficult. You know, I think I would probably at more goats because I cheat and get to do it from the helicopter. But I probably looked at more people than anybody in Utah has for goats and that kind of thing. And it still can be, I get fooled sometimes. You'll be watching them, think, okay, that's a young billy, and it turns out to be an Annie, you know, so I can see how it can happen, to be fair.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions from the RAC? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to questions from the public. Okay, doesn't look like any. We'll move on to electronic comments from the public.
All right, on the once a lifetime recommendations, 40% of the people strongly agreed, 40% somewhat agreed, and then we had 20% that strongly disagreed. And I don't really recall any specific comments on this particular agenda item.
Okay, I don't see, do we have any more public comment cards? I don't, on this one. So, okay, we'll move on since there's no public comments to RAC comments and discussion. Well, I'll entertain a motion then.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, what's the motion?
Go ahead and prove what the RAC is, what the division has recommended.
Okay, we have a motion to accept what the division recommendation for the once in a lifetime permit recommendations. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
We've got seconds. Okay. All right, we'll just do a raise of hands. All those in favor? Doesn't look like any opposed, so it passed unanimously. Okay, we will move on to the elk permit recommendations. Back to Dax.
All right, maybe just to jumpstart our conversation a little bit, just a reminder, 2023 was the first hunting season with our new revised statewide elk plan. Saw some interesting things, and maybe I'll highlight just a couple of them for fun, just for this region, just because there's a lot of especially general season elk hunting that happens here in this region. I presented some of this information at the Wildlife Board work session, but just thought maybe I'd share it again for anyone who missed that. You might remember on the any bull hunt, it used to be, one hunt. It was the rifle hunt, the any legal weapon hunt. It was almost a 2-week-long hunt. We had a quota of 17,500 permits for that hunt. And with the new plan, we divided it into 2-week-long hunts. And the first hunt had a quota of 15,000. And then the second week was unlimited, had no quota on it. We also created a youth elk permit that was unlimited. that would allow any youth that purchased that permit to be able to hunt any of the general season units in any of the seasons. They just had to follow whatever the applicable, if they're on a spike unit, they could only harvest the spike. If they're on any bull, they could harvest any bull. Just for some numbers, just kind of interesting. The 15,000 any bull permits for that early season sold out, but they didn't sell out in, an hour like they had been. It was over a period of several days. So I think pretty much anyone that wanted to get one could get one. And then for that second season, the unlimited season, that second week, there were 4,834 of those permits purchased. So, a little over 4,800 people were able to go hunt on that hunt. And then there were over 4,900 of the youth elk permits purchased. And one of the other interesting things there too, is for a lot of folks, that was their first elk permit that they'd ever purchased. Of all the general elk permits that were purchased last year, 23% of them were a first elk permit for folks. So almost a quarter of those were someone's first elk permit. 35% of those any bull tags for that second season were someone's first elk permit, and 51% of the youth permits was someone's first elk permit. So kind of neat. I think it created a lot of additional opportunity, and the feedback from the hunts was relatively positive, with some new areas being added into the any bull hunt, and that quota reduced a little bit. It didn't seem to be perhaps quite as crowded as it might have felt in the past. And then I heard some really good feedback from folks that went out on that second week just because it worked better for their work schedule, or they hadn't remembered to purchase a permit before. And so, yeah, we felt like in some ways that was a good win from the new elk plan. On the limited entry units, the limited entry side of the thing, we adjusted some of the age classes for the units managed for older age class bulls. We still saw really good success rates. We shifted some of the permits out of that early rifle season into a mid and mid season, and then added that late archery season. We saw pretty good success rates on our traditional limited entry hunts, and the age classes on bulls on a lot of units actually even jumped up, even with some pretty substantial permit increases. So looking good. We're just a year into it. We'll continue to monitor it and look at it. And we do have a mid-plan review scheduled after we have 3 years worth of data. But just a little update, and we can jump into elk recommendations and talk about any other details or specific issues that might be helpful.
I have one question. How far are we into this? You said we were into the elk management plan 1 year and it's set for 5, right?
It's a 10-year plan,
Is it
actually. 10-year plan, but with 2 mid-plan reviews.
And then those mid-plan reviews, is that when you would tweak things, maybe make changes, or would it have to be at the end of the 10 years?
No, we could if we sit down for a mid-plan review and we've got some major issues or some things we need to tweak, we would do it at that time. If it's just a thing or two, or if we decide we like how it's going, then we could leave it alone. So, but there'd be potential to make substantial changes if they were needed.
So would that be the time to bring up, like, for instance, on the youth hunt overlap in the archery elk hunt? Have heard of a lot of people that have complained about that, and we've had where it's a really, and I've actually experienced with my nephew, where you went up there and there was up on the north slope, and of course this is when it was all unlimited and we had a multi-season all going on, and there was hardly a place to even go because you had so many archery elk hunters. I mean, there was a lot more than I've ever seen before and more than I expected. And there's a lot of people feel strong that we need to do something different to get that youth hunt out of the way of the archery hunt, or something that
could be done this fall, this coming November, when we set season dates. Season dates could be adjusted this fall. As far as kind of the basic hunt structure, that's set in the plan. But if we needed to, if there was a desire to tweak season dates by a few days, that could be, for most hunts, that could be done this November.
I think you probably mentioned this number in your presentation. I can't remember, but was there a jump in non-residents purchasing elk permits this year? Has it stayed pretty close to that 10% or somewhere in that range?
So for general permits, it's a little lower than 10%. I think I have the numbers here. Let me see if I've got it. I don't think I have it here. It's like 6 or 7% on most hunts. I think the archery hunt was a little bit higher, but Very few of them were beyond, I think archery might have been 11%, if I'm remembering right. Don't quote me on that. But most of them were 5 or 6% of the general season elk permits purchased by non-residents.
What was the success rates on the 2 general season seasons?
So I have the data. So and just for comparison, the any bull hunt in 2022 success rate on that, when it was the 2-week season with the 17,500 permits, it was 11.7% for the rifle season. And then this year, that early hunt was 11.8%, so almost exactly the same. The later hunt was 9.4%. So they are low success rate hunts. They typically are and have been in that level. But yeah, those are the numbers for this year, for this last year.
Hey, Dax. So I've noticed on our age objective numbers, in years past, when you harvested an animal and you got your tooth data back, there was always like a 5.5 or 6.5. And now it seems like you guys actually went in and rounded those all up to the next number up. Is that kind of artificially impacting your data for the numbers for the elk?
So, and they're not actually rounded up. If it says 5, it's 5.5. So
I killed a deer back in 2011, and when I killed it, it was a 5.5. Now, if I go in there, it says 6. So that's why I've assumed it's all rounded up, because you rounded up my previous one that used to be 5.5.
I'll have to check into that, Jake. I don't know if I have a good answer for you. If we've changed something there, I'm not aware of it. So I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
I have a question on your spike elk units on, like, for instance, the book cliffs. Is it reasonable to say that you can't control the number of spike elk killed or hunted? I mean, if we have 15,000 spike elk tags and 15,000 hunters could be hunting, like, say, the book cliffs, correct?
That's possible.
I mean, so you could overhunt, you could hammer a unit like the book cliffs on the spike elk, possibly wipe out a lot of your yearling class bulls just on that one year, right?
You know, I'm saying it's possible. I'm not saying it's likely. So hunters tend to distribute themselves fairly well.
Do you have the numbers on the spike bull success rate in front of you there?
I've got just the general statewide. For unit specific, we can look that up, but I don't have that right here. Spike percent success this last year was overall, I think it was in the presentation, it was 12 or 13% overall. And for any legal weapon, it was 10.2. So the muzzleloader success rate was slightly higher, it was 12.6. And the multi-season success rate was substantially higher. It was 21% for multi-season spike. And up to 4,500 of those spike permits can be sold as a multi-season permit.
Yeah, what kind of feedback have you got on the late archery hunt? As I was looking through harvest data and satisfaction, I mean, I think you knew that was going to be a low success rate hunt, but what kind of feedback have you got from those that have had that tag? And as far as, applicants, is it doing its job, getting people through the system, or what was the reason of that?
Yeah, so that late December archery hunt, on the limited entry units that was new this last fall, that hunt was intentionally designed as, here's a challenge for someone who doesn't want to wait a really long time to draw an elk tag. We anticipated it would be low success. Success rate, I think it was between 16 and 17%. Actually, that's maybe a little higher than I thought it might be, but it's still, it's low. And and the feedback from that hunt was mixed. Some folks thought it was great. Some folks thought it was, felt like it was almost impossible. And we did have several people that drew that permit and then turned it back in before the season started as well.
So it wasn't half, it was a large portion of that, those that had a 0% success rate, wasn't it?
Some units, yes.
On that is, I think the goal was to start it low and then maybe increase tag numbers. Like how many years are you guys thinking to look at the numbers before you see if, I assume you need some data to look at the impact and stuff, or?
Yeah, and I know a couple biologists in some parts of the state inched those up a little bit, but I think most of the biologists wanted to see at least a couple different years before they went too wild with it, just depending on different weather conditions and that type of thing. Hard to really get a good assessment after just 1 year.
Is that something you guys have an appetite for, is to actually increase those numbers?
So we left it pretty open-ended in the plan as kind of just something to experiment with, the idea that we could potentially add more later, but we didn't put a real formal mechanism or direction in the plan. So I think, maybe that one will be governed a little bit based on appetites of biologists and the feedback they're receiving from the public and from folks that are hunting on their units. Maybe that's something when we go into a mid-plan review, could put a little bit more formal sideboards on it, but it's pretty open-ended right now.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people, so I'm actually all for increasing those a little bit. But
I got one more question. I think there had been some talk about like a private land only bull tag. What's the status of that? Is that something that would be looked at for further?
So because we're doing season date recs, not a year at a time now, this last cycle we did 2 years at a time, and this coming November, we'll be bringing around 3 year worth of season date recs for this fall. I expect, from talking to the folks here in the region, I think they probably would have recommended something for this fall if they could have, and you'll very likely see a recommendation for some type of a private land bull hunt at least in this region, that will come through this fall, this November.
That was for general season units.
Yeah,
right?
for any bull. And it's, I don't want to get too far ahead. That's something we'll discuss this coming fall, but it's just to try to address some of the, depredation and conflict issues that we see that are kind of unique to the basin with checkerboarded land, especially in our, lower elevation ag areas and stuff.
If there's no more questions from the RAC, we'll go ahead and move to questions from the public. Okay, we'll move on to the electronic comments from the public then.
Okay, for the elk recommendations, we had 13% strongly agreed, 38% were neutral, 13% somewhat disagreed, and 38% strongly disagreed. Some of the comments were related to the actual elk plan that was passed last year. Some recommendations about bringing back the multi-season hunt as a primitive weapon-only hunt, and some comments of that nature. Also about non-residents and the amount of permits that they could acquire. But as far as the limited entry units, there's not a lot of comment on that.
Okay, is there any public comment card? Looks like we have one. From Tanner Carlson, go ahead.
Tanner Carlson representing SFW. Our SFW fulfillment committee, we had a lot of discussion on this, and one thing we would like is with the San Juan, the division's requesting 14 additional tags. Try to get down to the age objective. It's already at the age objective. There was a slight uptick last year, and we believe that's due to the added elk hunts and the increased tags. So we'd like to not add the 14 tags, let it ride for this year, see where the age objective comes in at, and then go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, we will move on to the RAC comments and discussion.
I was just talking to people about the elk hunt and kind of giving them a hard time, especially if I knew that they talked about everyone, the mountains being so crowded that second season, over the counter, everyone from out of state's coming in. Obviously that didn't happen. And if I do the numbers right, like I feel like you barely killed more than 100 more elk this year, or maybe not even that much. So in the end, kind of, yeah, I guess I like to bring that back up because there's so much opinion before. And then that was probably it.
I liked, Chris, your comment about looking into the youth season to not have that overlap this fall. I think it's a great opportunity for the youth. And I think we got an email last fall about it from somebody who thought was a good idea in terms of splitting those seasons. And I think, I don't know, I think some of the demand on that general season disappeared when we got rid of the multi-season in terms of the demand. So I wonder if there's a possibility to go back to 2 weeks for elk if we're not going to do the multi-season. So just something, since we don't have, feels like a lot of the archers were jumping in to take some of those rifle tags with them not doing it. Can we not just go back to how we used to? But just a thought.
On that youth hunt, there was an email sent out about moving the youth any bull draw hunt into align with the muzzleloader deer hunt. And it kind of got overshadowed by all the muzzleloader talk last year, and so I don't think it ever got brought up. But I plan on bringing that up this fall as well.
Maybe this is more of a question on the San Juan discussion. What did the Southeastern RAC, I didn't get to that part of their meeting. What did they have to say about the San Juan numbers?
They approved the recommendation as presented.
My previous past life, I worked for the division, worked with Guy Wallace 20 years ago. Guy Wallace said, spike elk hunt will not work on the San Juan or the Book Cliffs. That was his firm thoughts on it. He says it works on the Manti, works on all those. And come fruition years later, spike elk hunt, Book Cliffs, spike elk hunt, San Juans. I feel like the spike elk hunts hurt the San Juans and hurt the Book Cliffs personally. I feel like that those ones should we should do something different on there, remove it. I don't know. We gave it the 5-day thing, but that didn't really pan out very well because it was said, well, we kill them on the first 5 days of the season anyway, so let's go ahead and have the 5-day. So there was on that. So I really feel like the reason why I feel like the Book Cliffs is hammered so hard on the spike is there's a road down every ridge. Those elk don't have anywhere to go. If you've ever been out there, you know it as well as I do. They have no place hardly to run out there. It can be a zoo out there. And you can have a lot of people out there on their spike elk hunting. So, I mean, that's just, I feel like it's something we need to work on in the future to get rid of that spike elk hunt there in the Book Cliffs.
I agree. I noticed a severe drop in bulls out there about 4 or 5 years into the spike hunt. It seemed like the bull population nosedived, and I don't think that was all contributed to the spike hunt. There's a lot of other contributing factors, but I think it did have an effect.
I kind of wonder too, like, so this year will be if I'm getting my years correct, this year we'll collect data on who actually hunted in the book cliffs with a spike tag, right? We didn't collect any from last season. Keep asking questions in the comments, sorry.
No, we do. We do ask folks like where they hunted when we do the harvest survey information. The harvest survey will be mandatory for all general season elk hunters this coming year, and we do ask what unit they hunt on. So we can pull those numbers out, and we've looked at them before. This is one we've talked about a lot over the years. I mean, it's a good discussion. It's not really something we're voting on tonight, but I think it's a good discussion, and it's something we can, if folks from the RAC are interested, I'd encourage you go sit down with Clint and the folks in the region and pour through the data on this one. We're not really voting on that here tonight, but I'd encourage you to sit down with them and look at the data and dig through it.
I agree with Grizz. I don't know. I'm feeling like we've probably killed enough spike in the book cliffs, but the people I talk to, they enjoy the opportunity. They love that opportunity. They're going out there and still hunting, but a lot of them are saying, we just do it because the opportunity's there, but they even feel like we've maybe killed enough. They would like to maybe see something different done with the spike. Maybe not eliminate it, but maybe just do something different with that hunt is kind of what I've been hearing as well. The ranchers out there have said they think there's been enough killed as well. So don't know how the tribe feels about it now, but the other ranchers feel like there's probably been enough of those killed.
There's no more RAC comments. We'll make, take call for a motion. Oh, did we not do the public comments? I thought we did. We did. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, we did public comments. Here, hand us your
Sorry,
card
I
there.
must have been asleep.
Hand us your card there, JC. JC Brewer.
JC Brewer. I must have been asleep because I missed it. I hadn't planned to comment on it at all, but since you and Richie brought it up, I hunt the book cliffs exclusively. I don't hunt anywhere else. I've hunted the book cliffs with a spike tag ever since spikes were initially allowed to hunt out there. I don't see any reason to change it. I adamantly disagree with the comment or the presumption that the spike hunt is damaging the bull numbers or the bull age group, either one out there. I just disagree. I think it should be left alone.
Okay. Do we have a call for a motion then?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the elk permit recommendations as presented by the Division of Wildlife.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the presentation by the recommendations for the elk permit numbers. Do I have a second?
I'd second it.
We have a second. Derek, all those in favor, raise their hand. Okay, looks like it passed unanimously. Okay, we had a request for a 5-minute recess after this one, so we'll take a 5-minute recess.
I know.
Okay, welcome back to Northeastern Region RAC. We are on agenda item 8, the antelope permit recommendations. We'll hear from Dax again.
Okay, thank you. For antelope, we managed for average age on our limited entry buck pronghorn permits. We managed for average age of 2 to 3. Most of the units in the state, well, actually all of the units in the state are either at or exceeding that age objective right now. And so on most units, we're recommending a little bit of an increase. We've been increasing permits on a lot of units for several years now, and still see that folks are harvesting bucks at or above the age objective, and harvest rates are pretty high. We have a few units that are remaining stable, and we're recommending decreases on 3 units this year. And those are units that were really negatively impacted by long-term drought, or on the cash-rich unit, that one was really negatively impacted by the winter last year, and they had a pretty big die-off. So yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Hey Dax, so I know the coyote bounty program was actually implemented more for deer, but do you guys think it's had an actual been successful for helping the antelope herds grow? It seems like around here locally that's been the case. It seems like the coyote program has helped them.
That's kind of funny you bring that up, Jake. So, there's a lot of focus on deer, right? And especially after a bad winter last year, we're always focused on deer, thinking about deer, looking at deer. And some of the conversations we've had have been on the coyote bounty program. Are there ways to potentially make that more effective to help deer, more targeted? And we were talking about how a lot of those coyotes are harvested in kind of desert country that doesn't typically hold a lot of deer. Got looking at it and realized the coyote bounty program, which is part of the Mule Deer Protection Act, probably does a lot more good for pronghorn than it does for deer. We really are harvesting a lot of those coyotes in areas where you would probably see pretty substantial coyote predation on pronghorn fawns. So we haven't done a formal analysis on it, but looking at the distribution of where the bountied coyotes are taken and overlapping that with pronghorn fawning habitat, there's probably a lot more coyotes taken in pronghorn fawning habitat than there are in mule deer fawning habitat. So.
You had commented that the bucks reach their peak at 2 to 3 years of age, and I'm just more curious, is that more of a Western wide thing? Is it more you see in Utah? I'm just more curious than anything. I didn't know if like in Arizona, I know sometimes they have some older age class where they just have better conditions. They don't have the drastic winters and whatnot like we have here as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from actually looking at like the Boone and Crockett record books, and then there's some guides and outfitters that have some really big sample sizes too of pronghorn taken over the years, and pretty surprising how many pronghorn that score Boone and Crockett are only 2 or 3 years old. There's definitely still older bucks that are quite big sometimes too, but you also see a lot of 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old bucks that might be, like an 11-inch buck or something. They're not that big. So they do seem to be the anomaly compared to most of our other big game species. You need, mule deer, probably at least, 4 years of age or older. With elk, you're looking, 6, 7 years before you start really approaching kind of that on average, peak antler or horn size. Pronghorn are kind of the exception there, where they can realize some pretty good potential at a pretty young age.
So I know just to help with that, from what I've seen is, especially in these northern climates, is those bucks rut so hard that they takes a lot more for them they start growing their horns in like November, December, January time when the winter's pretty tough. And so when the bucks are older, they've been rutting so hard that causes their horns to be smaller when they get into that older age class. Their body conditions just aren't there to grow the horns. So in those Arizona units, you might not see that as much.
Yeah, just one question with these units that you're recommending a decrease. Is that because of the population objective, not necessarily because you said that every unit has been above the age objective? And if that's the case, how are some of the other units, specifically like 9 Mile or South Slope Bonanza, how are they doing on population objective?
Yeah, so and the recommendations for the buck permits are not driven, indirectly, I think they're driven by the population, but we're really looking at the age. A couple of ones where we do have cuts, though, it is because like on the, I got to remember if it's the Santa Fe Desert, they had Fondido ratios in the single digits for several years during the drought. The same with the Box Elder Puddle Valley. And so the recommendation for the cut on those units is not necessarily because the age has really dropped, but because, the population has probably declined because they had a few years of really crummy production during the drought. And then also just those pretty much a couple entire age cohorts are missing. And so we're anticipating that those bucks just won't be there. And then that Cash Rich unit had just a major die off in that winter of 22-23, along with a lot of Wyoming. That's that unit just right there by Bear Lake and right next to the Wyoming border. They got just kind of hammered by that winter.
This is probably a question more for Randall. There were some issues with antelope in the Mighton, Pleasant Valley area for a while. I think there was some captures done. How's things looking over there? I'm assuming pretty good because nobody's called me about it.
Yeah, I'm Derek Ewell with I'm the biologist over there. So yeah, we did some captures out there in that Pleasant Valley area, in a pretty small area, targeting those ag fields. We've sent some of those to Arizona, and we've also had doe tags in there for the last several years as well. And we've made a dent in that specific area. The rest of the unit, the ag fields, or most of them are in the CWMU program, so they get doe permits and they can kind of take care of it that way. But that little section we didn't, and so we feel like we made really good progress there and helped out those landowners and allowed the rest of the unit to grow more pronghorn and take care of those problem areas. So.
Okay, doesn't look like any more questions from the RAC. We will go ahead and move to questions from the public. Okay, doesn't look like any, so we will move on to electronic comments.
Okay, for the pronghorn permit recommendations, 40% of the respondents strongly agreed, 20% somewhat agreed, 20% were neutral, and the balance 20% was strongly disagreed. And there weren't any specific comments left on this item.
Okay, we'll move on to public comments. And just because you're a division employee doesn't mean you can't make public comments, because it's all we have left in the room here. Okay, we will move on to RAC comments and discussions then. I will entertain a motion then.
I'll make a motion to accept the antelope permit recommendations by the Division of Wildlife as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the antelope permit recommendations. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a second. All those in favor, raise their hand. Passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to the antlerless permit recommendations.
Okay, for antlerless, we've got in here deer, elk, pronghorn, bighorn sheep and moose. And Rusty Robinson, he'll stand up and help if we got questions on the moose or bighorn sheep. For deer, elk, and antelope or pronghorn, I can I can answer those questions. We talk a lot about, especially when we talk about deer, we talk a lot about, bucks don't have babies. How we hunt bucks really isn't how we manage populations. The ways we manage populations are through habitat improvement, predator management, and antlerless harvest. So if we harvest females, the reproductive component of the population, that does have the potential to drive populations up or down, depending on what you do with antlerless harvest. To be clear, we use antlerless hunts for different reasons, and for pronghorn and for deer, the antlerless hunts that we have are really targeted at trying to address specific issues or conflicts that we might have, whether it's public safety with animals in town or on a road, or conflicts in ag fields, or disease issues in some cases, and to influence animal distribution. We do, so most of our doe pronghorn and doe deer hunts are for that. We don't have any hunts for those two species that are designed to reduce overall populations or manage overall population numbers on units, just specific areas. With cow elk, that's different. We have some cow elk hunts that are designed for distribution or public safety, that type of thing, but we also have quite a few cow elk hunts that are designed to help keep our populations at the objectives, the population target level that we want to have. And so that's, where we're coming from on these recommendations, and happy to answer any questions or help out with the discussion.
I've got one question. It was on that East Canyon hunt. It says your numbers were 12,000 elk last year and it dropped down to 2,400, 2023. Is that a typo, or?
That may be, I'd have to
Am
look
I
at
reading that
one.
wrong, or?
For East Canyon elk you're looking at, or deer?
Yeah, East Canyon. Maybe that was deer.
For deer.
Because there was one that had a question on it for elk. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. That's my bad. I read it wrong.
I think it was the deer one, right?
It was.
Yeah,
My bad.
Unfortunately, that's probably right for deer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one question. I've noticed as I was looking through these numbers, there's several units that are under the population objective, but we're still harvesting or giving out several hundred cow permits. Can you explain the reason for that?
And I'm guessing you're thinking Book Cliffs. Is that the one that's standing out to you? Yeah. So some of it is, if we're close to the objective, you probably have to have some annual harvest every year just to maintain, so the population doesn't continue to grow. That's probably what we're looking at on the Yellowstone. Book Cliffs is a little bit different situation. We really have seen some issues in the elk population, the Book Cliffs, especially during those drought years. We saw really low pregnancy rates. We had low production for a long time, and we ended up with really old age class cows, a ton of, 20-year-old cows, late teenage cows that tend to be less productive. And so the cow hunts in the Book Cliffs started initially to address areas with really high use, or like the roadless area, or areas where we had elk concentrating on really critical deer winter ranges. Those have kind of transitioned into trying to remove some elk to maybe take some of those older animals out of the population and jumpstart that elk herd. Also, during the drought years, we had some probably pretty serious concerns just about having enough feed for everything out there. So that's kind of the background or rationale why we might have some cow permits on units that are below objective.
So is that older age class that based off of, on the Book Cliffs, that based off of just, is that on tooth data, or is that on elk that you've collared and noticed that they were older cows, that type of deal? Where does that come from?
It started with capturing the elk that we captured. So then we started collecting teeth on cows and saw the same thing in the tooth data from the cow hunters as well.
So would that be cow elk with collars, or the old ones, the ones you want targeted?
well, with the hunters weren't shooting very many collared ones, and they were still really old. So my son harvested a cow down there that was probably 20 years old, and the meat was like black. It wasn't even red. Pretty tough old elk, but we ate it.
You had commented in one of the previous racks about the where they looked at all the care and passing and book lists with all the mouths to feed on the out there and being part of the limiting factor. Where are we at with that? Is there any room on or removing horses? Is there, where are we at with that? I guess question.
Yeah, and that was a committee that Miles chaired here in the region a few years back, just looking at the book cliffs, and it was when we were experiencing a lot of issues. The elk population was struggling, deer were struggling. The livestock producers were feeling like there wasn't the feed out there. We had growing horse numbers, bison, just kind of everything combined. When that committee looked at that forage analysis, it looked like if we had good conditions and had, got some water, we had maybe just barely enough feed to take care of everything, specifically on that summer range. But we hadn't had very many good years where we were getting water. So, that's part of why I think we were pretty aggressive on bison permits for a while there. I know there were some horse gathers done. A lot of work went into that. And I think that's, really a great help from management. And I don't think we're out of the woods yet either in the Book Cliffs. Last night it came up in Southeastern region. There's still some concerns about, aspen conditions and forb component. And, if you look at WRI and look at the habitat projects that have been, initiated and done by the division and the BLM and SITLA and partners, it stands out on the map. We've done a lot of work there, and we've got to get some water too. And the Book Cliffs is one. I think I actually was talking with Dallin today here in the region and talked with the wildlife manager and biologist in Southeastern region last night. It's probably we need to continue to look at and look closely at and see where we are and if we have the right balance for what our objectives are and how many animals are out there. And it's complicated because it's not just elk. It's elk, it's horses, it's livestock, it's bison, it's a little bit of everything. So but it's one that I think is still on the radar, and we want to work together with everybody to keep trying to do good things down there.
Is there any horse captures in the plan, Dusty?
I'm not in the loop on that these days, but maybe someone here can help.
I can comment on it a little and then let Dusty, as far as on the BLM aspect. Grizz, it is a very complex thing out there. So I think Miles and Dax, these guys can tell you, Pat, we put some horses gathers together. We've taken about 1,200 horses off there in the last, probably 4 years. So these were not BLM horses. I have a relationship with a tribal family that helped enable that claimed those horses, and that's why we was able to do that. I'm not sure where we're at right now. My relationship with the tribal family is still good, but generally speaking with the tribe, it's difficult right now. We can put gathers together. We can continue to gather those horses. We do need funding. It is, like I say, it's very complex how we do that. We need more funding again. It's expensive. It's around $500 a horse to gather them with a helicopter. A helicopter is the most effective way to do it. We did gather some horseback, and we used some other means. We did trap some, but we need to continue to work on that. Horses are going to reproduce at about 40% a year. So yeah, when I get more time, we'll try to put another gather together, and I'll leave it at that.
And I don't have any further comment on that right now. But I did have an actual question for Dax on deer. If we can jump to the area outside starvation. I know I drive that section from Vernal to Fruitland probably 12 times a month now for a family issue, and sometimes 15 times. And it seems like the does and the fawns all concentrate on that. I mean, we know that was the killing fields last year with the snow, but this spring, those does and fawns and last year's fawns just concentrate on that section of Highway 40. And I think that, is there any opportunities to go outside that corridor and create some herbaceous growth, like with pinyon juniper removal and create, because they're hunting that herbaceous growth, right? They're not, that's coming up on that highway, and it just seems like a really bad situation, and it is every year, but it seems like after all of those kind of patterns shifted down to the highway, those deer aren't leaving the highway. Like there's probably more on that highway. They're just alive more this year because you can see them because there's no snowbanks. But I mean, is there anything in the works for that section for the does in the spring?
Yeah, and I maybe would default to any of the regional staff that might be able to give you a good question, Dusty.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. So we hear this. I mean, last year we heard it a ton about all the deer on the highway there and that they're all dead. They're all dying. And then it's kind of interesting. They're all still there again this year. So they didn't all die because they're all back there. But we have done a ton of habitat work on the property that we own, which is just north of the highway, right in that zone on our Rabbit Gulch Wildlife Management Area. We've done chainings, we've done lop and scatters, we've done tons of stuff, reseedings. And believe it or not, there are more deer using that than are using the highway. It's actually a small percentage of deer on that unit that are using that highway. And as far as like collar data, we've kept about 40 to 50 collared animals on that unit for the last several years. And we've had 2 get hit by cars. And so, I mean, keeping 50 on, so we're getting multiple, I mean, we're putting 20 to 30 out a year. And so we're over 100 collars that we've had, 150 collars, and 2 have been hit by cars. And so there are, close to 20,000 deer on that unit. And so it seems like a lot, I think, on that highway. But if you actually kind of look at the whole unit as a whole, there are way more deer everywhere else. And I think that maybe Pat could talk too. We've talked about high fencing, and maybe he knows a little more about it. Could talk about that.
Hey, I'm Pat Rainbold, the Habitat Program Manager for Northeast Region. Yeah, like these guys have talked about, there's a lot of difficulties over there. There's not a lot of public land in Duchesne County in that strip. It's a lot of private, a lot of tribal grounds. So it's difficult to get projects going. We are working with UDOT right now they just did a study of that whole Highway 40 corridor to look at opportunities for underpasses and overpasses and fencing and on the highway. It's difficult. That terrain doesn't really lend itself to having big bottoms or big bridges to go over. A lot of the ag fields are on both sides of the highway, so they just kind of mingle around and go back and forth. But that is one of our priorities areas, and we're doing everything we can in that area and habitat, and as far as addressing the wildlife vehicle collisions.
Okay, thank you.
I just had one other question. I can't remember. Has there ever been like control permits for elk on the Wasatch unit? Did you guys have that in the past? Okay.
We did.
Was that very effective or?
We harvested a lot of elk on it. That was, maybe 12 years ago now or something like that. We were way over objective on that unit, and we kind of threw everything we had at it, and we harvested a lot of elk for several years there. We had huge hunts, huge cow hunts, and then and control permits were also used. And then we brought those numbers down. We reconvened an elk committee and wrote a new unit plan there, and actually increased the objective a little bit with also the addition of the private lands only tags. That's it was part of when the private lands only elk tags came about to help with distribution. And we haven't had it since then. It was really effective. It killed a lot of elk, and it also, we had a lot of folks that complained about it too. I think John Bear was on the board at the time, and he said it was a bloodbath. So we harvested a lot of elk.
Just a couple comments or questions on the Book Cliffs where you trying to target those older elk. What is the data showing? Is there any success in terms of hunters actually killing older elk to help bring the age down?
So they're definitely harvesting older elk. I don't know that it's bringing the age down. I think, at this point, we're probably kind of comfortable just keeping some cow permits there, and hopefully we get some more wet years. Things look good, and that elk population can rejuvenate a little bit. And it's one we probably need to keep an eye on and see it. We talked about it a little bit last night, and on some of our units in some parts of the state, we actually have a range for the elk objective, a range of numbers, kind of depending on conditions. And the Book Cliffs unit seems like it can be so drought susceptible. It might make sense to even maybe look at a strategy like that in the future. So.
No more RAC questions, then we'll go ahead and move to any questions from the public. Okay, we'll move to the electronic comments from the public.
Yeah, so on the antlerless permit recommendations, 33% of the respondents strongly agreed, 33% somewhat agreed, 33% strongly disagreed. Basically, the only comments, specific comments, were those that disagreed, and they just felt like after the hard winters and that we experienced previously that maybe we shouldn't be harvesting any antlerless animals to allow those herds to build back up.
Okay, we will move on to the public comments. Is there anybody with a comment card? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the RAC comments.
I'm a little concerned on killing those older cows. I mean, we see the same thing in livestock. We get rid of our older cows because they don't reproduce, right? I just don't know how you can effectively do that on a hunt, because I'm not going to kill an old cow. I mean, I'm going to go out there and kill something pretty tender to eat, if I'm going to kill a cow. So I don't know if the cow elk strategy is going to work to kill those older cows unless you have some kind of bonus program to kill an old cow. But other than that, I don't know that it's going to do it. I don't know. I'm a little bit concerned out there with the elk and deer both. I mean, I'm a rancher, but I'm a sportsman too. So I'm a little concerned about the numbers.
I've remembered 2 hunts out there, and both times we ended up getting old elk, but it was the last day of the hunt. So I think the one cow was pushing 25 years. It came from Hardware Ranch in like 1979 as an adult. So this was in the mid 90s, but still.
Do you have any other RAC comments? Okay, I'll make a motion or call for a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the recommendations of the DWR.
We have a motion to approve the recommendations as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a second. All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous, passes. Okay, we'll move on to the shed antler gathering recommendations and big rule amendments by Rusty Robinson. You're done, Dax. You survived all the racks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So this is kind of a interesting presentation. You probably had to slow it down to 1.5 speed to understand everything, but it's I'm sorry. So this was, after the winter of 22-23, there's a lot of concerns over shed hunting, and we formed a shed antler gathering committee. Natasha was good enough to participate in that committee. We appreciate her participation in that. And so this presentation kind of took you through what the committee recommended to the division, and then what the division, there's some of those things that had to be legislated in order to take effect. So, and then it's what the division took to the legislature, what actually ended up in legislature compared to what we recommended. So what did and didn't end up in legislature. And then based on that, it's our recommendations to the wildlife board regarding shed hunting. And then the associated rule changes that go along with that. In addition to that, there's also some miscellaneous changes to the big game rule that we're proposing that are primarily law enforcement based. And so if there's any questions about those things, night vision devices or the check-ins or anything like that, I'll probably defer to Lieutenant Christopherson on those. But yeah, most of the questions and comments I've been getting and reading online are regarding the seasons, both the recommending of a non-resident season and the not recommending of a resident season. And so if I could just explain kind of the rationale that the committee came up with for those recommendations. So the committee recommended a non-resident shed hunting season start date of May 1st. And basically they felt like with a lot of the surrounding states having a May 1st shed hunting date, there wouldn't be really any place for those non-residents to shed hunt except for Utah and Arizona. And so it was the sentiment of the committee that maybe we would get overrun where those people were really itching to get out and go shed hunting, and maybe Utah was the only place to go do that. And so with that, they are recommending let's just keep it May 1st and not get overrun. And at the same time, give the residents kind of the first shot. So some of the reasons for not recommending a season date for residents is that number one, there's lots of other recreators on the landscape, and the committee felt like, with all the turkey hunters and cougar hunters and skiers and bikers and hikers and all that, it felt like that was kind of singling out shed hunters, that they're not the only people out there on the landscape, and we're not banning all these other people. Why should we ban shed hunters? We also looked at some data. We actually looked at collar data from about 1,000 deer statewide. And we looked at deer movement during the emergency closure this year. And then we looked at the movement after the closure was lifted, and there was no significant difference in distance moved at that scale, at the statewide scale. We all know that, we can bump deer when we're shed hunting, and we are concerned about, pressuring deer and that sort of thing. But at least at that scale, at a statewide scale, the committee felt like it didn't make sense to have a season if maybe it's not contributing to deer mortality that we can tell. It was also the sentiment of the committee that maybe there was added pressure during the closure where people are having to go out and not shed hunt multiple times and then go and pick their sheds up on opening day. And there was some of that feeling. And also, just so everyone's aware, I think something that was maybe lost with all this is that the legislation granted the Wildlife Board the authority to establish a resident shed season if they see fit. However, because of a clause in the legislation, it wouldn't apply to private landowners and their guests. And so just so everyone's aware of that you could still set a resident season. The Wildlife Board could do that, but it would only be on public land. And so hopefully that clarifies some things and answers some rationale, and I'm happy to answer questions.
I have a question. I think that you guys are going to be implementing a shed license. Was there any talk in the committee of just making that included with a combination license or a small game license?
Yeah, so the committee actually recommended to require, based on your age, we weren't going to require anything for, 11 years old and younger, but the committee recommended to require a hunting license if you're 12 and older, and a hunting license and a permit if you're 18 and older. Neither one of those things passed through legislation. And so so we're not actually not requiring or recommending a license or a permit for shed hunting, only the shed antler gathering ethics course that we're currently requiring. So there's really no change there.
No, okay, I was misunderstood there.
So question, if there's no license or permit from a law enforcement standpoint, as far as trying to patrol those out of state, that may come in with somebody in state, how would that be patrolled?
Sorry, maybe I didn't understand that. Can you ask that again?
Well, if somebody came in with somebody from in-state, like how are they going to check to see your resident status if you don't have to have a permit or a license?
Yeah, so even non-residents would be required to do the ethics course. And so with that, you'd still need a customer ID and that sort of thing. And you could, I'm assuming, Lieutenant, if you're out spot checking and somebody has an out-of-state address, Yeah.
I had a question on the clause about the emergency closure provision. So as it reads, like there's a recommendation that there could be an emergency shed antler gathering closure triggered by winter feeding, and that closure being statewide. I'm kind of curious about that, where, northern Utah might have that condition, but then southern Utah wouldn't. What's the discussion?
Yeah, that was actually kind of surprising at the committee. In 2017, when we did an emergency closure, we initially had it in portions of the state. And then we heard a lot of complaints from southern Utah that they were getting inundated, that people were traveling down there. And then this year, we just tried to avoid that. We did a statewide closure, and the committee actually liked that. They're like, yeah, let's not overpressure any specific region or place. If conditions are bad enough anywhere in the state that triggers deer feeding, we're just going to close it statewide.
I know the question came up on regulating the antler buyers and making sure that everyone has that, pay that fee and that.
Mm-hmm.
How are you gonna regulate that? Cause I mean, on my way here tonight, I did see someone on the side of the road between the point and Vernal buying antlers on a scale. So, I mean, there was only a few, but it was, so you got a lot of independent guys that are buying them. Maybe one guy just buying them for knives, and he's, that's all he is, so I just curious on how you might, I know that question came up last night in the Southeastern.
Yeah, just talking to law enforcement, it sounds like, if this passes, they would meet internally and decide how they're going to enforce that. And I'm probably making some assumptions here, but if Lieutenant Christopherson was driving by and saw the same shed antler buyer, he could pull over and check him. And if he didn't have a COR, then that would be unlawful. But I assume there'll be some internal coordinating on that and how we're going to make that enforceable.
Okay, if there's no more questions from the RAC, we'll move to questions from the public. Okay, we will move on to electronic comments from.
Okay, for shed antler gathering rules and the big game rule, 43% strongly agreed, 29% somewhat agreed, and 29% strongly disagreed. The specific comments, there were a couple that felt like that there should be a season for residents as well. So that was the main comment and feedback that was left on this item.
Okay, we'll move on to public comments. Don't see anything, so we will move on to the RAC comments. I do have a comment on the closure for non-residents. I don't really like that for the simple fact that I feel like it's drawing a gap between different states and hunters in general. And I don't like how I see how there's a line starting to be drawn between hunters and people like that. I understand why they did it. With Wyoming putting on a season, Idaho has a season. Colorado has a season. And Wyoming's moved to non-residents they can't go the first week of the season, and then it's open to them. So I understand why it was done, but I just don't like it. And I didn't like it from the other states because, like I say, it just feels like it's bringing a line in there. Just kind of my thoughts on it.
And maybe to follow up with the question I asked, that makes sense with the statewide closure. It's more pressure driven, not necessarily condition driven. So that makes sense.
Just a quick comment. I just don't want to see this thing get over-regulated. It's a good activity. People enjoy it. I just don't want to see it regulated to the point that people are like, don't even want to go out, because it's a good family deal and gets people out and active.
Yeah, I'm kind of like Grizz as far as the season for non-residents. I too kind of see the reasoning. And as an individual, I definitely could benefit from that. But at the same time, I think of the other seasons that we have with big game hunts. And I'm not aware of any that residents may start a week or two before non-residents. So as I'm thinking as a whole, I just have mixed feelings about that a little bit.
One more quick comment. I agree with Richie on his thoughts on it as far as that too. And we have laws out there as well. And I know law enforcement's been probably hitting the hills trying to make sure that we don't have people out there driving all across country, that type of deal. And I do like that they put a restitution on it. They put a price on it that we can. In fact, I just seen where a guy had poached. There was an article where a guy poached a bunch of elk antlers out of Wyoming, out of the park, and he cannot go on federal land for like the next 3 years. There's, some stiffer penalties. And I think that's a good thing that's come out of this, is these stiffer penalties for this, instead of judges in some areas that wouldn't even prosecute when we had people going in there for closures. So. There's no more RAC comments, discussion. We'll make a call for a motion then.
I'll make a motion to accept the shed antler gathering recommendations and big game rule amendments as presented by the Division of Wildlife.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the shed antler gathering recommendations and the big game rule amendments as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second. Go ahead for a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, looks like it passes unanimously. We will move on to our last item agenda, the 2024 CW antler list permit recommendations. And this will be by Chad Wilson.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot. This is pretty straightforward on these recommendations, so I don't know that I have a whole lot to add on it.
Okay, is there any questions from the RAC on the CWW recommendations?
Just wondered if there was like a rotation where you might get a earlier spot on the agenda in the future.
We'll see. I think I blew my chance the other day, but we'll see.
Hey, Chad, while I got you up there, is not totally in line with the CWMU, but on the Diamond Mountain Landowner Association, how I know you guys have said it shrank. How much did it shrink? Do you know?
I might bring the biologist up there. One became a CWMU that was 10 or 12,000 acres, and then maybe one other landowner that another 4,000, 5,000 acres maybe.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah. So I don't have exact, but somewhere between 10 to 18,000 acres.
Okay. I just hadn't heard the official number. I know in the past they've had 100%, landowner buy in on that? And I just heard that it got smaller, but I never heard how much.
Yeah, they kept most.
Does those CWMU tags come out? Is it the numbers adjusted because some of that went to the CWMU, or is it? I know Dax has said in the previous ones that the diamond tags, we got more tags because it said that CWMU got smaller. Was all that just a lot of that because of the CWMU? Or is it
No,
yeah.
for Diamond Mountain, for the LOA tags, it's just done off of a percentage. So it probably is a little bit smaller because they have a smaller percentage. But yeah, that would be the only reason. It'll fluctuate every year now with however many tags are, if whatever is approved this year will affect what they get next year, if that makes sense. So whatever percentage of the habitat that's enrolled in the LOA, that's percentage of tags that they'll get.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the RAC? Okay, is there any questions from the public? I mean, the division here. Oh. Okay, we'll move on to electronic comments.
4 people responded. 50% strongly agreed. 25% were neutral, and 25% somewhat agreed, and no specific comments on this one.
Okay, there's no public, don't look like there's any public comments, so we'll move on to the RAC comments discussion on this one.
I'd like to say I wish we could get more of these CWMU tags, and maybe not just antlerless CWMU, but more of the bull and buck tags. A higher percentage of that to the public. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, I will call for, since there are more comments, discussion, call for a motion on this.
I'll make a motion to accept the 2024 CWMU antlerless permit recommendations as presented by the Division of Wildlife.
I have a motion to accept the antlerless permit recommendations for CWMUs. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second on that. All those in favor, raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Do I have that is the last item on for that. So do I have a motion to adjourn? It's regional presentation. Was that last one? It was just a presentation. Do we want to present on that one?
That one was just for the
That's
northern
what I
region.
thought. That's
Yep.
what I thought, yeah. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Since Natasha's making all the motions, I'll second that.
Did you say second?
Signing off.
All right, we're done.